It's remarkable how many studies of marketers and CX professionals say the biggest problem is they can't make sense of the data. The lack of data is not a problem. It's lack of understanding. And typically that understanding doesn't come from peering more vigorously into the spreadsheet. That understanding comes from actually talking to real people. So when I work with brands who don't seem to really know what their customers want, I typically have the same advice every time, which sounds very simplistic, but it's actually really useful, which is, here's what I want you to do. I want you to actually get on the phone with 20 different customers this week and 20 more next week and 20 the week after that, and then tell me what you think. And that sounds so basic, but it's something that so many marketers and CX professionals simply don't do.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. I am your host, Blake Morgan. I'm recording this Sunday night at 8:20 p.m. and you guys, I'm going to be honest, I am so bone tired. Any of you parents out there just feel like the work never ends? I'm so grateful that I live in 2022 where I can do all these things, but I am going to take some time off in the next 2 weeks to chill with my mom who's coming in from Savannah, Georgia. I love this job. I love this podcast. It is so fun to interview experts from every walk of life. One of these experts is an incredible speaker. I have seen him live in Las Vegas, and I was so blown away by his storytelling prowess. I'm talking about Jay Baer, someone I've known for many years now. He is one of the most inspirational customer experience, customer service, and marketing keynote speakers. He is the New York Times bestselling author of 6 books. He's a 7th-generation entrepreneur, the founder of 5 multi-million-dollar companies. He's also really into tequila, and he's about to launch a tequila TikTok channel, maybe. He's a lover of all things plaid. He's just easy to talk to and is fascinating and funny. 2 very important F words. Let's get to my podcast interview with my friend Jay Baer. Jay, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. You might be my most popular guest ever. I think this is your 3rd time.
Well, thank you very much. I'm expecting a silk robe from UPS to arrive any day to wear on my 4th appearance. Always good to see you, Blake. Congratulations on all your success, and delighted to have another chat.
Yeah, and I mean, you've had some huge success. Just your company was acquired recently, and I know a lot of people watching and listening already know you. So would you be so kind as to share the good news with everybody tuning in?
Sure. As many listeners and viewers may know, I founded Convince and Convert, which is a global strategy firm primarily in the areas of customer experience, digital marketing, social media, content marketing. I founded the firm in 2008 and built it up in a tremendous client list and a very popular blog and series of podcasts, et cetera. Sold the firm a few months ago to a group called Lane Terralever, based in Phoenix, owned by some very old friends of mine who I've known for years and years and years. And it's fantastic. Things are going great. We're working on a lot of interesting projects together. Convince and Convert, the whole team is in place and all the clients are in place. So it's really a perfect marriage. And now we've created a new collective called Experience Dynamic, which aims to cobble together a number of professional services firms to be able to offer brands the full complement of marketing plus CX services. The big move here, Blake, and I'm not telling you anything you don't obviously know, is that now with so many marketers in charge of CX, my observation is that as one of the people out there who speak about both, marketers don't really understand CX, right? Mm-hmm. They just don't, right? Then all of a sudden in most brands, they're in charge of it and they're like, oh, cool. Okay. So we're trying to have a professional services collective that can help marketers kind of understand CX and vice versa. And so it's really exciting. We're making some great progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, marketers. So you feel like they don't understand CX. Is that because they've been given CX and they really hadn't anticipated they would ever be responsible for it?
Partially that's it, but I think also if you think about what marketing's responsibility is in most organizations, right? It is primarily new customer acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also, generally speaking, how marketing is compensated and rewarded and promoted.
Yep.
And when you think about CX, only a fool, looks at the top of the funnel alone. We all know that the bottom of the funnel and retention and advocacy is ultimately the most important part of customer experience. But most marketers aren't really trained in the art of retention. And so they've been given an assignment that requires 360-degree thinking, but they've been trained to think 180 degrees. And so kind of widening that perspective, I think, is what needs to happen. And that's something that we're trying to work on.
So it's been a tough few years for businesses. They've had to pivot. They've had to go farther for the customer and do things that weren't sustainable. Arguably, loyalty died during COVID because customers didn't have the luxury of just doing business with their favorite brands. They had to think about survival. So what are some of the things or trends that you've seen in the last 2 years from businesses that you felt handled this pivot well?
I think there's a couple of trends. One is that customer experience matters more to consumers than it did pre-pandemic. And all the data will bear that out. And it's perhaps not a surprise that when the whole world is turned upside down and everything is kind of terrible, the one thing you don't want when you're buying a sweater or tires or software or a chiropractor is any hassle at all, right? You want everything to go as smoothly as it possibly can. And that's why consumers have said, look, we care more about ease of use and frictionless interactions and all the other things that customer experience is a part of. We care more about this than we did pre-pandemic. And I think that is fantastic news for the customer experience community. Not that CX wasn't important before, of course it was, but it's even more important now. And I think that's a trend that will actually continue. The second piece that I find really interesting is that consumers now, and there's been some really interesting data on this from Accenture, are voting with their own worldview. This was a trend that was starting before the pandemic, but accelerated during the pandemic and the George Floyd shooting here in the US and a lot of other issues. Like, people are saying that they really want to buy from brands who see the world the way they see the world. And that is very interesting because I have been in marketing for a very long time now. I am deceptively youthful looking if you're watching this in video format. And the entirety of my early career, the whole point of marketing was, how can you maximize your addressable audience? How can you reach the most possible potential customers? And now it's more about how can you reach the smallest number of customers who truly align with your organizational values and perspectives. One of the data points in that Accenture report said that 44% of consumers, this blows me away, Blake, 44% of consumers would change banks if their bank did not believe what they believed. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know when the last time you changed banks.
Oh,
It
so brutal.
sucks. Like it sucks.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, right? And so, if you're changing licorice brands or something, okay, whatever, not that much drama, switching cost.
Right.
But banks is a lot, right? And so this, I'm not sure it's necessarily a net positive for society, but this like, hey, this kind of people, the sneeches with stars use this bank, and the sneeches without stars use this other bank. Mm-hmm. That is a really interesting trend, and it'll be fascinating to see where that ends up in the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, as you say this, I'm thinking about this research that I've been really interested in. I think it's from Accenture that the customer, more than half of customers have been so impacted by COVID and the pandemic that they've really reimagined their own life. And I think almost
same research.
Half, okay,
same
perfect.
Report. Yep.
Yeah, almost half. And I don't remember exactly the stat, but I'll pull it up while we're talking that they've reimagined their own lives. Oh, and what they said is COVID has made them more aware of how they impact the world, and basically social good and what's happening outside of their own work, their own life, they're under their own roof. And I think all of us, none of us really can go back to the way things were. We are all forever changed. So brands are really being forced to realize that people are watching everything they do. And even though they might not aim to be political, you can't really avoid it. Like everything you do is political. So how do you do business and not necessarily walk on eggshells? Like, what do you tell your customers that are dealing with this new reimagined customer?
I think you've got to lean into it, actually, right? I don't think you can run away from it. I think you have to run toward it. I think you have to accept the fact that trying to play it safe down the middle is no longer necessarily the effective marketing approach. That you have to say, all right, what do we stand for as an organization? Make sure everybody in the organization is actually on board with that or on the same page, and then go out and communicate that to customers and figure out how to attract those who feel the same. But I've talked to a lot of brands about this in a consultative capacity over the last 12 to 18 months. And I don't think, look, if organizations like Delta are saying, nope, we've got strongly held beliefs about this particular issue or that particular issue, I mean, that is a global airline. Generally speaking, you would expect them to want to be able to fly as many different kinds of people around the world as possible. They're like, nope, this is what we believe, right? So if organizations like that are taking stands, right? If the Swiss banking community is saying, look, we're not going to support the Russian invasion, and they're not neutral anymore for the first time since 1948, I don't think average and safe and middle and I don't want to rock the boat is actually possible anymore for most brands.
Yeah, and it's a strange week, I think, for everybody watching the news and seeing all the companies that are pulling out of Russia or supporting Ukraine. It sends chills up your spine, but I mean, this is the world we live in now, where people are watching everything we do, and language has never mattered more. Communication has never mattered more. You are chief communicator. You teach marketers how to communicate. How do you think marketers can do a better job of being empathetic communicators, better listeners, all the things we know about being customer focused?
I think it's two pieces. One is understanding. You know that saying, you can't step in the same river twice? Because when you step in the river, you inexorably change it, and so it's no longer the same river. That's true about consumer behavior right now. So the first step is to understand just what you and I are speaking about, that consumers have fundamentally changed. Not a little bit and not temporarily, but they have fundamentally changed. What they care about and what they're willing to pay for has changed. That's the first thing, is to understand that to be true and believe it to be true, because it is. And then the byproduct of that, and I really believe this, that the companies that will succeed most over the next, I'm going to say 1 to 2 years in every category, are the companies that understand their customers the best. And so what I've been talking to a lot of my clients about is, if you have not done rich customer research in the last 2 years, you literally have no idea what you're talking about, right? If you're using a 2018 persona or 2017 or even 2019 customer attitudinal data, you are completely flying blind, right? This is the year, I think, to redo all of your customer research, because what you had before is probably no longer valid. And I think that organizations that do first-party research and also augment that with some interesting technology are going to have a dramatic leg up in every category.
So when it comes to doing research, it's not an easy thing to do. I recently went to the hospital, had an appointment, then got a letter in the mail asking me to send them back a survey. So to me, this is crazy. What are modern ways to collect data?
Well, it depends a little bit on your permission slip from your customers and the places and the ways that your customers communicate with you. But I would certainly agree that the best practice is to ask for feedback or deliver research as close as possible to the moment of interaction. Partially, it's just recency bias, right? Like, the customer is going to tell you so many more things that are of interest the closer to the actual interaction you get. Now, you're exactly right that it has to be made easy for customers to increase participation rate and pull more data points out of the ether. But at the same time, you have to balance that with making it so easy that it doesn't actually tell you anything. Like, you ever go to the restroom in the airport? I try to avoid it, as you probably do as well, but it happens. And a lot of times in airports now, they've got the little smiley face push button. Like, how much did you like the restroom?
Yeah.
Happy face, medium face,
Right.
unhappy face. And I know there's several companies that supply that technology. Some of them are probably watching the show, and that's great. And look, some feedback is better than no feedback, but there's not a tremendous amount of nuance to how many people press the smiley face, and
Right.
and so when you make it too easy to participate for customers, you kind of run that risk too, that there's not enough meat on the bone to make interesting marketing and CX decisions. But you're exactly right. Like, communicate, and this isn't just true for research; it's true for all communications. And I've been saying this since. I wrote my book Hug Your Haters, which was like 6 years ago. We've got to communicate with people with the tools that they want, not the tools that the business wants. And your example of, hey, I got a survey in the mail is
It's crazy.
symptomatic of an organization that says, well, we are set up as a business to handle paper surveys because that's how we've always done it. And because they've always done it, they just figure they should keep doing it that way. Meanwhile, every customer's like, I'm not going to write out a longhand survey response. This is insane.
Yeah. It is insane, absolutely. And I think I like what you say, that you have to be close to your customers. You have to be able to pick up nuance in how they say things. And if you're willing to spend the time with customers, you'll probably get a lot of rich data. I'm assuming a lot of marketers have never even met their customers.
It's so true what you say, Blake, that most marketers don't spend a lot of time with customers. It's absolutely true. Pandemic has not helped that, of course, but it's always been true, at least since sort of the advent of digital marketing. My very first job, this is I was an intern, so I was still in college. This is circa late '80s. I worked in a public relations and marketing firm in Phoenix, and the owner of that firm told me something when I first started. I was literally a kid. And he said, Jay, we don't learn anything about our clients or our clients' customers inside this office. And he really encouraged me and all the other professionals there to get out of the office, go visit clients on site, go talk to the customers of our clients. And it's really good advice, and especially now in modern marketing and modern CX, where we are surrounded by data, yet we're still largely starved for insights. It's
Mhm.
remarkable how many studies of marketers and CX professionals say the biggest problem is they can't make sense of the data. Lack of data is not a problem. It's lack of understanding. And typically that understanding doesn't come from peering more vigorously into the spreadsheet. That understanding comes from actually talking to real people. So when I work with brands who don't seem to really know what their customers want, I typically have the same advice every time, which sounds very simplistic, but it's actually really useful, which is, here's what I want you to do. I want you to actually get on the phone with 20 different customers this week and 20 more next week and 20 the week after that, and then tell me what you think. And that sounds so basic, but it's something that so many marketers and CX professionals simply don't do.
Yeah, 100%. I remember you telling me stories of when you started in retail, and I mean those lessons you learn as a young person. It's like sometimes at work I think we forget. We become too used to how we do things, and we forget that some things, some customer experience principles are just very basic. Um, As far as the questions that your clients are coming to you with now as they
Mhm.
seek to deal with this reimagined customer, you've mentioned focus on customer data, customer feedback. What aside from that are you telling your clients now that are looking to retain this reimagined customer?
Responsiveness, responsiveness. Speed is now oftentimes interpreted as caring. You try to contact 3 brands. I'm getting a new house, and so we tried to get a painter recently.
Mm-hmm.
Called 3 different painters, as one does, because I don't know what it costs to paint a house anymore.
It's
Called 3
expensive.
different painters. Yeah, it is. One painter got back to me the next day. One painter took 2 days. The other painter took 4 days. Which painter did I hire?
Right.
Right? I hired the one, even though they weren't the lowest bid, I hired the one who got back to me the first because my perceptions, if you get back to me that quickly, you care about my business more. And just about everybody on the planet sees the world the same way. So if you've got to get better at one element of CX, I think responsiveness is the one to spend time on first. Because it really can be a differentiator. I saw some really interesting research from Appfolio, the property management software company. I'm doing a presentation for them next week, and they did this huge national study of people who live in apartments. And they said, since the pandemic, how much more important is it to you that your property management company responds to your issues quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Over 30%. Just since the pandemic, right? That is a giant move on the chessboard. What has fundamentally changed about living in an apartment? Literally nothing.
Right.
Nothing has changed other than their desire for you to be right on top of it right now. Nobody wants to wait anymore. And the one thing about speed and responsiveness as a CX principle, it's one of the only ones that never stays static or moves backwards. Like I've been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned, and I've talked to thousands and thousands and thousands of customers, and nobody has ever said to me, Blake, I've been thinking, and maybe it would be okay if this brand just did it more slowly.
Right.
Nobody ever says that,
Right.
right? So ever, right? So what was fast 3 years ago is slow now, and it's an endless cycle of customer expectations going up, and you having to meet them, and expectations go up again, and you got to meet them again. And so a lot of brands have used the pandemic as an excuse to be slow. Sorry,
Yeah.
the sweaters are stuck in a ship off of the coast of Long Beach, so it's going to take 14 days. I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't care.
Right.
You don't get a pandemic pass.
Right. And it's really evident to me in the contact center because hold times are crazy and response times
Yep.
are horrible. And even shopping, we bought a new house, we're shopping for furniture. Some companies, some nice e-commerce furniture companies, they don't even seem to have customer service. It's crazy. Like they don't have a call center, they don't have chat, maybe they have email, but I mean, they don't even respond. And it's
I know, and you
shocking to
keep
me.
thinking like, is this a real company or is this just like a
Yeah.
weird Shopify front end, right? Like, and you're like, interesting.
So in some respects, I feel like our industry is growing so much. All the cloud CX vendors, their businesses blew up in the last 2 years. But on the other side of it, you almost feel like we're going backwards. Like companies are investing less in the contact center than they have in the past. So why do you think that is happening? Or are the great companies just getting better and the average companies are just getting worse?
I don't know on the second question if the great are getting better
It was a bit
and
of a
worse are getting
wordy,
worse.
right? Yeah.
I'm not certain about that. But I think partially what's happening is companies are trying to trade people for software. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Cloud CX vendors and accompanying sort of software is going crazy,
Yeah.
but contact centers, which typically rely on people power, are struggling, right? It is way less expensive at scale to buy more software than to buy more people. Also, there is a labor issue, continues to be a labor issue. There is no software issue, right? Software will be happy to work as hard as you'd like it to. And so it is a story as old as time itself, which is business will seek operating efficiencies. And if they believe that software, whatever that software purports to do, can paper over whatever shortcomings they have from a personnel standpoint, that will be the approach that they typically try, at least initially, until they realize that perhaps it's not a trade-off that their customers are willing to accept. But I think that's what we're seeing a lot now. Is like, well, maybe we could reduce money on agents if we just buy this new thing. And maybe they can, maybe they can't.
That is really smart, everybody. What Jay said is that we're investing a lot in automation, but we either don't want to invest in people or we can't find the people to staff our contact centers. I read a stat just before we got on this podcast that like 1 in 3 contact center agents were looking for a job in 2021. So I don't really always understand this labor issue. Are we not able to find these candidates? Do we not pay them enough? To me, it's always a priorities and resource thing. But when a company has a great contact center, it is always such a breath of fresh air. Do you?
Yeah, and some of it, of course, is just some of it. I think is just the vibes too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
your husband Jacob is really the expert on this, but
on vibes.
the
I'm the
employee.
expert on vibes.
Not
He's not
well,
the expert
also
on
on
vibes.
vibes, but on the fact that the employee experience
Yeah,
has to precede the customer experience, right? Like, there are some great call centers out there for sure, but there's also some call centers that are a little Kafkaesque and not exactly the most fulfilling work environment or work
yeah,
assignment. And you've talked about this on the show and in your work. It is essentially impossible, both spiritually and frankly mathematically, to deliver great CX if you don't first have great EX. It just doesn't work that way. You can have competent CX. Like you can be okay if your employee experience is also just okay. Like you can make that work. But there is no on this planet, I don't know of a single organization that has great customer experience that doesn't also have really terrific employee experience, and that's not an accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you're talking, I just got a great idea for an infographic, Jay. Thank you. But I'm imagining like
I'm here to help.
the infographic looks like this. The awesome contact center to me is no scripts. It's not outsourced or offshored because there is sometimes a disconnect when you're dealing with people that I just want to say they're not paid as well, I think, and they're not treated as well. Maybe not always, but that's my experience. So no scripts. Employees are happy. They're paid well. That doesn't mean they're in the U.S., but it seems to me that often they are. And the contact center is valued. And then in contrast are scripts measuring average handle time, unpaid workers. And you can tell when you talk to them on the phone, they're just very depressed sounding, apathetic, and reading a script. And, it's just very obvious. Any thoughts on my
And so the
infographic
question I always
idea?
ask is, yeah, I love it. And the question I always ask is, well, has nobody ever run the calculation on this? Right? If
Mm-hmm.
you look at this from a lifetime value perspective, right, and say, all right, what is the impact on churn and customer advocacy and LTV
Mm-hmm.
if we have a better call center experience, as well as employee churn and employee LTV? Like, doesn't that get modeled out so you can actually make a rational decision? Because maybe in some organizations the net gain isn't worth it, right? It's like, look, yeah, we understand that people would be happier and customers would be happier and employees would be happier if we handle our call center this way, but we don't sell a very expensive thing. And so what? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pencil out for us.
Right.
Okay, maybe that's the case, but I actually question whether most organizations have actually done the analysis, right? And oftentimes I think it's just like, well, we assume that if we can save costs on customer service, that's a net gain to the brand. And I'm not sure that's always the case, right? I mean, here we are in 2022 talking about the same issue that we've been talking about for a long time, which is until brands think of customer service as an investment, not a cost, they're only going to be so good at it.
Yeah, and Fred Reichelt is back, bringing the world a new form of net promoter score. It's
Yes.
called like net revenue retention or earned growth rate. So he's looking
Yeah.
at how many of your new customers are brought in from former customers. But the only way you would know about this is if your accountants start doing customer-based accounting, or basically in the onboarding process, you say, how did you hear about us? And most companies just
Yes.
don't do it. They don't track it. And so they'll really never know.
Yeah, and I love, as somebody who wrote a whole book about word of mouth, I love the premise. I think in practice, it's a little tricky to measure. accurately, but as a philosophy, I think he's exactly right as usual.
Yeah, yeah. So as we look toward the future, what do you think would make a company that seeks to be more customer focused? What is one tip you would give them as we look toward this reimagined customer we talked about in the beginning of the podcast? If you could leave our listeners and viewers with one idea, what is the most valuable idea as we think about CX?
You know how more and more brands have chief customer officers?
It seems that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. Why isn't the chief customer officer a customer? Like, why don't we spend more time, money, effort with and create truly viable customer advisory boards that we can really tap into, that we can really ask these kind of hard questions for, that we can do secret shopping, not just with professional secret shopper organizations, but with actual customers. This is one area, Blake, where I think B2B is actually better than B2C, right?
Mm-hmm.
In business to business, because they know their customers better typically, because it's a longer relationship, higher average dollar value, there's fewer of them, et cetera. It's more common in B2B to have CABs, customer advisory boards, and things of that ilk that actually provide real value to the brand in terms of product fit and pricing and customer service. I don't see it as much on B2C, and I think it's a shame. And so that's one of the things that I would advise people to do this year is to say, hey, go get a bunch of actual customers and just set up a system where you can interact and talk with them on a regular basis
Mm-hmm.
because they will tell you the truth if you just assemble them correctly.
Mm-hmm. I love that advice. I think everybody watching this should listen to Jay and get an advisory board together, and they will help you. Jay, do you think you have to pay these people, or is it a volunteer thing?
I think typically you pay them in access.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice would be to not make it transactional because sometimes you get less good results if it feels like a transaction, like a quid pro quo.
Mm-hmm.
But you say, hey, we're going to give you access to this very special behind the scenes tour, or you're going to get first dibs on new products, or you're going to get to do a conference call with the CEO, or whatever the thing is. Like, make it special. It's like at Disney when you get in line first, right? It's not necessarily free passes to Disney, but you just get to jump the line. So typically, psychologically, I feel like jumping the line is valued more by customers than just like, oh, here's a gift card for, some comments.
Yeah, I just took my daughter to Disneyland for the first time, and we did jump the
Nice.
line with that fast pass. And I mean, I could not wait in line for 90 minutes. I think I would die. I just can't.
It's it is a lesson in patience. Any sort of Disney oriented day spent with children for sure.
Yeah, no, we had such a good time, and it's funny now, like doing that experience now, where I am in life and what I've learned. It's really really interesting. So everybody watching, go to Disneyland if you can. Jay, let's do some quick rapid fire questions before I let you
All
go.
right,
We reached the end of the podcast. Jay, are you ready to take some rapid fire?
I am.
All right, Jay. Let's say you are on a desert island. You have water. You can bring one other food and one other drink. What are they?
One other food and one other drink. I'd probably bring something like renewable on the food side.
Oh,
What's a
interesting.
renew? Yeah, like what's a food that would perpetuate food? I guess like um, corn. I'll say corn. That's probably a
Mm-hmm.
terrible idea. I'm not a food scientist. I'm going to say corn. Maybe you could plant that, grow more corn.
Mm-hmm.
One drink. My actual answer is tequila because I'm now a certified tequila sommelier, and I'm actually doing a lot of tequila tastings for clients. That's intermixed with marketing and CX
Oh my
content.
God, it's
Super
awesome.
fun. Uh, but I don't know that that's the smartest thing to bring to a deserted island. But that's what I would bring.
I was in Malibu the other day and I randomly walked by this building. It said Casa Amigos office. Isn't that
Oh,
George
interesting.
Clooney's like
Yeah,
brand?
I didn't
I
know
was
that they
like,
had a Malibu office. Yeah,
but yeah, it was just very, very strange and cool.
just knock on the door. Say, hey, it's Blake. I'm here.
George, you there? All right. What is the greatest music or band of all time?
Of all time, that's a very tricky proposition. I would say my favorite, and I've spent some time thinking about this because I founded the radio station at my university and a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent book I read was The Big Book of Rock and Roll Band Names, which is amazing, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say Radiohead.
Okay, awesome. If you could have lunch with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Probably Blake Michelle Morgan, because I haven't seen you FTF in so
That would
long.
be fun.
That would be fun. It's been too long. One person, dead or alive. I'm going to go Abe Lincoln as a political science major.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. What is your most embarrassing work moment?
My most embarrassing work moment that I can talk about on this show. I ate some weird stuff in a break room once when I was working in an internet startup, and in a staff meeting, vomited all over myself and the conference table. That was not optimal.
Wow, that is pretty
Yeah,
bad.
it was not great. It was not great.
If you had $1 billion, what would you do with it?
$1 billion. I would try to solve homelessness in America
And lastly, what,
because I think it's a solvable problem if we actually worked on it together.
as a Californian, I will support whatever you do to help get that solved. Lastly, what is one tool or resource you picked up during COVID to work on personal growth and self-development?
Oh, well, because I don't drive to the airport much anymore, I started walking a lot around my neighborhood. And so I actually listen to a lot fewer podcasts than I did pre-pandemic, but I listen to a lot more audiobooks. And so for me, that's been the big change in my kind of habits and the way I consume information is now I'm doing an hour and a half of audiobooks a day. And while it hasn't really benefited my business, one of the things I did, Blake, over the last year, and it's taken like a year, is listen to all of the Harry Potter books because I'm a little too old. Like my kids read them, but it just wasn't really a thing that I wanted to do when they came out. But the audiobooks are amazing, but it's like 127 hours of audio because the books are so long. So I'm almost finished. I've got like 9 hours left of the entire Harry Potter series.
That's awesome, Jay. Well, thank you so much for being on the Modern Customer Podcast. I really appreciate it. And all of you watching and listening, until next time, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new community at customerexperiencecommunity.com. Join your peers, get access to incredible resources, and become a founding member. See you there.